Dear friends from Bulleen constituency, from Victoria, and from Australia, I haven't given up the attempt to explain to the people of Australia how they've been fleeced or scammed by the Liberal and Labour parties. And I will start distributing some flyers in the Bulleen constituency now because I intend to contest the November election. And if the Federation Party gets registered by the time, maybe from the Federation Party, but maybe otherwise in some other way. But that's not the point here. The point is I need to get this message out to the people. This is why I resigned my job. This is why I've been writing books, complaint to the International Criminal Court, cost-benefit analysis with Gigi Foster. And now I'm actually working on a paper that shows that lockdowns actually increase even COVID deaths. So there's a lot of really bad stuff that has happened to Australia and Victoria over the past 2 years, and I am not giving up my effort to educate and to bring the people of Australia on board so that they understand what's going on. But because my flyer is really, really dense, it's got too much information and data, and I can understand if people get frustrated by looking at it and saying, what's going on? Can't I make things simpler? Well, one way is to use this particular method, which is to talk about it in this particular video. Hopefully that will help people who haven't, got the time to really understand what I'm trying to say. So this is the basic data that you need to understand, that everybody in Australia, everybody in the entire world needs to understand. And I'll go through this a bit slowly here because this is, once you understand what's going on here, everything else becomes really simple after that. So what is going on here is that this is the mortality rate or the death rate of Sweden over the past 20 years. It has been depicted at a rate of per 10,000, how many people die per year. So in 2000, as you can see here, the first one is 2000, and in 2000, 105 people died in Sweden out of 10,000 that year. Okay. Now, as expected, there's a bit of variation. It increased till 2002, then it started falling, again increased, again fell, and so on. It just goes a little bit up and down. But overall, you can see there's been a downward trend. And the interesting thing is that over the past 5 or 7 years, since 2000, let's say 2012, this red line in the middle is the average of the past 20 years. Since around 2011, 10, etc., you can start seeing that most of the death rates have been lower than the average. So we know that in the first half of this period, which is up to 2010, Sweden's death rate was much higher than what it is currently. Okay, so no one was screaming about pandemics, etc., but its death rate, people dying per 10,000 or per 1,000, per million, whatever, the death rate was much, much higher than what it is over the past 5-10 years. Okay, so now we get closer to the current period, and you see that, let's go to 2018. 2018 is really important because I'll come to this number very shortly. It's 90.6. So you see that compared to 2000, the death rate had fallen by 15 out of 10,000, which is quite steep. It's quite a significant improvement. And that's where it was in 2018 in Sweden. And then what happens here, please note carefully that in 2019, which is this little thing that I'm going, highlighting with my mouse, the rate fell down to 86.4. That was the lowest in Sweden's history. By the way, this data is taken from the Swedish Statistical Agency website. It's visually available for anyone to download. It's very easy to create this data, this chart. You can just download the data and plug into Excel and you get this chart. It's very straightforward. But note this point here that from 2018, there was a sudden drop in 2019. Now, this, by the way, is called there was a mild flu season. The flu was very mild that year in 2019. And so that left a lot of people who would otherwise have died that year, they continued to live. The elderly, many of the elderly. Okay, so we had a deficit of some sort in 2019. In 2020, which is the so-called COVID pandemic year, the people who were left behind because of the mild flu, most of them died. And so what happens here is really interesting, that if you combine the two average, the death rate of 2019 and 2020, you average it out, it is actually 90.6. It is the same as the death rate of 2018. And so you can imagine that, so it's 91. So in 2014, it's 91.8. 2015, 92.8, 91.7, 91.4. It sort of varies all over the place normally. And so if it is 90.6, the average of 2019 and 2020, then I think we can conclusively say that there was absolutely no evidence of a major pandemic. In fact, virtually nothing happened in Sweden in 2020, because the people who were vulnerable and susceptible because they were very old, they were left behind because they didn't get the flu that year, and so they didn't die. They then died due to COVID in 2020. So but the average of the 2 years, 2019 and 2020, was exactly the same as that of 2018. So the trend is still downwards. And so you look at 2021 now, and then it is 88.3, which is close to the lowest in its history, excluding 2019, but that was an exceptional year. But in 2021, even though COVID was going on, the death rate was 88.3, which is actually lower than the average death rate of Sweden over the last many, many years. And so there was no excess death in Sweden that year. Now this chart holds the key to everything. Once we understand what's going on here, we know the massive amount of scam that we've been, the lies and the scam told to us by the politicians of Australia. Why? Because Sweden, if you remember, was the only nation which was led by a person called Anders Tegnell. He refused to do the lockdowns. He refused to do the border closures. He refused to do the mandatory masks. And in fact, none of these happened in Sweden till today. There are no mandatory masks. There are no border closures. There are absolutely no lockdowns. So what he did was to focus upon the elderly, and initially there was a bit of an error, a mistake. They couldn't do it as adequately as required in the first few weeks of the pandemic, and so later in mid-March they started focusing, and then their death rate, as you can see, is pretty much has been unchanged. It has been going down rather than up. In the chart, I do not see any pandemic worth mentioning. And if you look at the analysis by Michael Levitt, he's a Nobel Prize winner, he says that at the most, 3,000 extra people died out of 10 million, by the way, in Sweden because of COVID, and extra deaths because of COVID. And so we now look at the second, this particular chart that I've actually been sharing in my flyer, which is very confusing if you just look at it in isolation. But now I hope you understand what I'm trying to say here. So I'm saying there was a mild flu season in 2019, which had therefore 86.4 death rate. Then I'm saying you add these two figures of 2019 and 2020, and then you get the average of 90.6, which is the same as that of the mortality rate of 2018. So there was no change between the 3 years. The average is exactly 90.6 for all 3 years combined. So what do we mean by when the average is the same? There is no pandemic worth mentioning in Sweden. And so I asked the question, where is the COVID pandemic in Sweden? Can anyone show me? And you can write to me at my email address. Okay, so that is the background to the other part, which I then have more data for you to consider. And that is basically saying, never has a bigger lie been told to Australia by its leaders. And I've just explained this now, that there was virtually nothing happening in terms of the COVID pandemic. It's a very mild pandemic. You can't detect it in Sweden, which had no lockdowns and nothing of the sort that we did here. So the argument was that lockdowns will stop it, but they actually didn't do any lockdowns, and they didn't have anything at all. So how come we are making such a fuss about it? And that's because we were lied to. People are telling us that this is once in a 100-year event. It's a Spanish flu. It's not. It's nothing in comparison to that. And in fact, Professor John Ioannidis, who is one of the most significant epidemiologists in the world today, he's from Stanford University. He wrote to me, confirmed to me by email personally on the 9th of April 2022 that COVID is 50 to 500 times smaller than the Spanish flu. And actually, if you add the distribution, age distribution, that the Spanish flu killed the young, this one is killing the elderly. They actually see the net effect is even much less than the 500 times that he's talking about. And so we can see that Daniel Andrews lied to us from day one, and Matthew Guy has supported the lies, every single lie of Andrews. And so what I argue is that Labour and Liberal parties are unfit to govern. And the second point I want to sort of highlight in this particular thing in my flyer is that never has greater harm been caused by any Australian government in the past. And so what we do in Australia is there's a culture of cost-benefit analysis. And so Professor Gigi Foster and I have done a cost-benefit analysis published on the 11th of May, the executive summary, and it's available on the internet. It's available on the link that I will share for the website that I maintain for my candidacy. You can get all the information from there. And if you can also write to me at sabhlok@gmail.com, I'm fairly prompt at responding to emails that I get. So this cost-benefit analysis, which is using the standard methods of economic analysis and health analysis and well-being analysis, etc., which are obviously used in thousands of cost-benefit analysis across Australia in the past. And it proves that at least 36 times more harms were caused to Australia by the lockdowns and border closures than any benefits. In fact, the argument that Scott Morrison makes, that he saved 40,000 lives, there's no bigger liar than Scott Morrison. I think he should take the prize as the number one liar in Australia's history, followed by, of course, Dan Andrews and so on. And of course, Matthew Guy is not far behind. Let me assure you that. So the guy who currently represents us from Bulleen, he is a major liar, is a massive liar. And last year, a year and a half ago, when I asked him to raise some question in the parliament about what's going on, he blocked me on Twitter. He doesn't want to represent us either as a representative. So the Liberal Party and Labour Party both are involved, and they've copied this whole thing from China. So this was basically my summary of explanation of my flyer. It's a bit complicated. I can understand you might not have time to understand why I'm saying this and what am I intending to say. I hope this video clarifies. There's a lot more here going on here. So I've written a book called The Great Hysteria and the Broken State. So this is the book. I don't know if you can see it. So that's the book that provides a lot more detail. I've got a complaint to the International Criminal Court. You can have a read of that. And of course, the cost-benefit analysis with Professor Gigi Foster, that's underway at the moment. It'll be converted into a book form shortly. So there's a lot of material, but of course, there's a lot more to representation than just this issue. But unless we are able to first confirm to ourselves that we've been lied to on a scale unprecedented in Australia's history by people like Morrison, by people like Dan Andrews and Matthew Guy, till then we cannot even try to fix the problems that they have created for us. So the stuff about inflation, etc., I've talked about this on my video on my YouTube channel. You can have a read of that, but listen to that. But really, the problems they've created are so humongous because they overreacted, they told us lies, and they would not listen to honest people like me. They are dishonest. I'm an honest man. You can check it out yourself. I'm not asking you to trust me. Please check out everything that I have said. It's 100% accurate. It is validated. It is proven, whereas these guys have lied. And so with that, I hope that you will, understand what I'm trying to say, and then we can get in touch, and I will seek to represent you in the Victorian Parliament from Bulleen. Thank you very much.